According to biblical myth, about 4,400 years ago, God had a tantrum and flooded the entire planet because he apparently needed an excuse to make rainbows. But he allowed Noah and his family, along with a representative breeding pair of every kind of animal on Earth, including birds and insects, to cram into a single 450-foot-long wooden boat and live there for a year. Well, life in Noah's Ark must have been an absolute nightmare. The Bible specifies the dimensions of the ark, that it had a single window in the top, and that it was packed full of animals whose sole caretakers were a family of 8. Animals eat, breathe, and expel wastes. All of them. It's sort of what makes animals animals. The tonnage of food and fresh water required to feed even the most conservative estimate of fauna on the ark for a full year would have required a whole separate ark. And considering that Noah also had to cater to the specialized diets of many of the animals, eucalyptus for koalas, bamboo for pandas, an inestimable amount of fresh meat for the carnivores, and so on, most animals would have died of starvation well before landfall. But that's the least of their problems. Breathing produces carbon dioxide, which is heavier than oxygen. So with the only window in the ark at the very top, without some sort of an advanced air circulation system, every aerobic organism wedged into that floating death trap would have suffocated. But it gets worse than that. If you've ever owned a hamster, you know how smelly the cage can get in just a day or two. But it's almost impossible to imagine the amount of methane, ammonia, and other noxious chemicals that would have been produced in the animal waste on Noah's Ark. It would have poisoned everything except bacteria. The 8 human zookeepers would have had to remove tons of liquid waste through the small window at the top and disinfect the watertight vessel every day. But wait, would it have been watertight? The storm described in the Bible would have torn that rudderless floating menagerie to pieces. They would have had to contend with tidal waves generated by massive tectonic shifts when the fountains of the deep erupted, as well as all the debris the cataclysm churned up. And then there's the hurricane-force winds. It would have meant certain destruction for a wooden boat of that size. Not to mention the carnage such violent weather would have caused to the ark's inhabitants. Just picture shoving the entire San Diego Zoo into a giant blender. Of course, one can avoid each of these problems just by having God perform miracle after miracle after miracle. But that begs the question, if the Noah story requires God to intervene and violate the laws of nature so often just to make the trip work, why didn't he just forgo the global genocide by performing the single miracle of enlightening humanity? Heck, he knew we were gonna fuck up again soon anyway. But if you still think a literal Noah's Ark best explains everything on the planet,
Error.